So it's my pleasure to welcome to our course Robert Smith, who I know through a former student of mine in Puebla. Robert is an American artist, a Mexican artist. It's a little unclear because he's born in the United States, but has resided much of his adult life in Mexico. So in Puebla more recently. Robert, would you like to give us a brief introduction as to who you are?
Of course. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. You're exactly right. I am originally from the United States, and I lived in the United States until I was around 30, at which point I moved to Mexico City, and then from Mexico City, moved to Puebla. And I'm now 61 years old, so that means that I've spent more than half my life here in Mexico. So I'm I guess what I would consider to be cross-cultural, and I'm delighted to have had this opportunity to spend, or to have grown up in the United States, and then to have spent much of my adult life here in Mexico. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's great to have you with us, and I think that oftentimes we tend to box ourselves in with categories. So it's good to be cross-cultural, intercultural, a citizen of the world.
Exactly, exactly. I feel very fortunate in that sense.
So I know that you're going to talk about your art in general, and then we'll talk about how your art connects to the COVID contingencies. So I'm going to let you run through this PowerPoint that introduces us to who you are and your progress from fashion to art.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, I am originally from North Carolina. I like to tell people a little bit about my history because I believe that it helps understand the person that I am today, and it certainly does have an impact on my visual, on the art that I produce. I was born in North Carolina in a town called Reidsville, which is close to Greensboro. You can see Greensboro there on the map. But I spent most of my time as a child and as an adolescent in a little community called Mountain Home, which is close to Asheville, actually, about 20 miles from Asheville, North Carolina.
So that's in the Appalachians.
Sorry?
That's in the Appalachians?
It sure is. It sure is. Yeah. Wonderful place to grow up.
It is beautiful there, for sure.
Yeah. And here you can see some photos of my mother and father on the left after they were recently married. And then you can see the middle photo. I'm there with my paternal grandparents, and my grandmother, who's holding me there, is the person that taught me how to crochet, which has become very important in my work. And then on the right, you'll see a photo of me as a child with my mother and my sister. My mother's holding my sister there, and my mother is the person that taught me how to sew. And my father, I have to thank for teaching me, for instilling in me an appreciation of our family history, of our past, of where we come from. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. So when I was in high school, I was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship to finish high school at the School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which was fantastic for me. I had an opportunity to study visual arts for 2 years. From there, I studied clothing design at the Fashion Institute of Technology, which is in New York, and it forms part of the university system of the state of New York. And while I was there, I did a semester in Trent University, which is in Nottingham. in Nottinghamshire in England, which was wonderful as well. And so I feel really fortunate to have had these opportunities to study, first of all, visual arts at the School of the Arts, North Carolina School of the Arts, and then clothing design and design in general at the Fashion Institute of Technology, which is an incredible institution as well. Next slide, please. So here, I'd like to show some of the things that I did when I worked in the clothing industry, because it's the way that you work in the clothing industry is a way that I continue to work when I produce, when I make my art. I always tend to think about developing collections and my color palette, which you can see here on the right. You'll see a trend board with an image. The trend is called New Romantic, and you'll see the colors that coordinate or that come from this trend, and then you'll see the product where we will be applying this trend. Next slide, please. And then here you'll see the fabric. This was a design for woven shirts, men's woven shirts, and they would have been dress shirts for men. And it's a fascinating area, even though some people might think designing men's shirts is a bit boring. I personally didn't think so, because I had an incredible experience of learning a lot about textile design. Yeah, because one of the things that changes, maybe the model, the cut of the shirt doesn't change very much from season to season, but the textiles do, and the colors do.
What year was this, Robert, more or less?
Sorry?
What year was this?
This was in the mid-'80s when I worked at this company where we made shirts for men and young men.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Now, these are some products that I developed for young men. These are shirts that were made in India. I would travel to India every 2 months to oversee the production of samples and the development of new models and styles. This continues to be, these continue to be from the mid-'80s.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
Why India? Was it because of the fabric being produced, or?
Yeah, the company that I worked for that had this, the company was called India Garments, and the label that these particular shirts were manufactured under was Address Unknown. And if you look at the label, you can see it's a really 80s style logo there. And the company, as I mentioned before, was called India Garments, and so all the clothing that we produced was made in India. And at that time, India had an incredible textile industry where shirts could be made out of cotton and at a really, really attractive price. Most of our product was directed to department stores and, what are they called? Like stores like what would be a Walmart, or they're not department stores, there's another name for them. But anyway, you understand what I mean.
Yeah. Does India still play that role for fashion?
Sorry?
Does India still play that role in fashion?
Yeah. You can still find lots of clothing in the U.S. market that has been produced in India.
Okay.
And over the years, since I left New York, left the clothing industry there, the quality of the garments now that are made in India has gotten much better.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So from New York, I moved first of all to Mexico City, which is the capital of the Mexican Republic, which is right in the center of the country. And then that was in 1988. And then in 1994, we moved to Puebla. Puebla is just east of Mexico City. It's about a 2-hour drive. And I love living in Puebla. It's much smaller than Mexico City, and Puebla has an incredible climate. It still has a high altitude, but it's not quite as high as Mexico City. Delicious food, incredible architecture. The center of Puebla has been named a UNESCO
Heritage.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Exactly. You're exactly right. Yeah. Well, you know Puebla, I believe, don't you?
Yes, and just to remind our listeners that Canisius College does have a study abroad program in Puebla, and I encourage people to consider going to Puebla with Canisius once we can safely travel again. Yeah, it's a delightful city. It's manageable. It's got great views with the volcano, and it's got great architecture, great food. Talavera is there, so I quite like it a lot. Yes.
Yeah, it's a very nice place. Next slide. So after living in Puebla here for several years, during which I had worked in the clothing industry here, and I had also worked as a professor of English as a second language, and I had also worked in La Ibero Puebla. It's a university, it's a Jesuit university here in Puebla. I had worked there as a part-time teacher, professor, and I eventually ended up becoming the director of the textile design program there. So that was a very nice opportunity for me, because I had never been that closely involved in the academic world. I had always worked in offices where we planned the production of, the development of product, all related to the clothing industry. And so to go into this academic world was a big change for me. But you know, with changes also come lots of opportunities to learn things, and that's what happened for me. This for me was a great opportunity to learn a lot about how universities function and how to design programs, how to organize people, classes, lots of work, lots of different activities that I had never imagined, but I luckily had the skills that I was able to carry from the clothing industry into the learning industry, I guess we could say. Yeah. Right. Next slide, please. So while I was at the Ibero as the director of the textile design program, I had the opportunity to take a workshop, a textile art workshop. And so, you know, as I mentioned before, I had studied visual arts at North Carolina School of the Arts. So I have a foundation in visual arts. And then, you know, of course, my work in the clothing industry had allowed me to have a great deal of contact with textiles. And so I decided that I wanted to explore again this world of making art. And so this nice delightful little workshop that I took helped me discover that. Now, I want to tell you a story about one of the first pieces that I made. You can see in this piece here that I use things that have been printed, you know, sheets that paper that has been printed. This piece actually has some sandpaper in it. You'll see some string there, a tube that's the string was wound around, and so I would make these little collages. And so the first one I made was exactly, well, not exactly like this, but very similar to this. You know, pieces of paper sewn together, woven together. And so I can remember when I took it to the framer, and I said, you know, I want you to frame this. And he was a really lovely man that made beautiful frames. He's not with us anymore, but Rafa, he took my piece and looked at it, and then looked at me, and then looked at the piece again, and then looked at me, and said, you know, what is this? What is this? I said, Rafa, please do not grab this. Please do not grab my piece of my work when you're ready to light your boiler, because that's, you know, that's what he kind of thought. He said, well, this looks like trash to me.
Right.
And it was, but I had had an impact on that trash, and it had become something else. And then when Rafa finally gave me the piece in the frame, he said, you know what? I have had the opportunity to look at this and study it and think about it. And he said to me, it really is something special. And so I felt, that made me feel really lovely. Yeah, that was a that's a nice memory. Next slide, please. So you'll see that a lot of these are pieces that I started to produce at the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000. I would save all kinds of little textile scraps. I love textiles. It's a appreciation that I have developed because of my work in the clothing industry, because of being around my mother when she would sew. I used to sleep under quilts that my great-grandmother had made, that my grandmother had repaired. So for me, textiles are important, and they have a special significance. And so I've always saved little bits and pieces of textiles, and upon reflecting about on what I used to produce then, I tend to realize that this is a mirror image of my feelings. At that point, when I was living in Mexico, I felt this is what would happen to me. I would go to the mall, and people would turn around and look at me and watch me, and you know, because they knew that I was a foreigner, and that for me was a bit uncomfortable. And then of course I speak Spanish, but I speak Spanish with an accent, and a lot of times people who are not expecting that from me, but they get it seems like they get some sort of block, and they cannot understand what I'm trying to say. And I've been told that my accent is in Spanish is not well, it's okay, you know, it's understandable, and I shouldn't be worried about that. But anyway, I felt a bit trapped, I guess I could say, and I wanted to pass as unperceived. So you'll see that the colors tend to be very very neutral. This particular piece, it has an eraser there in the middle of it, and the eraser has been fixed into place, kind of tied into place, almost tied up into place. So I tend to think that's what the meaning of this work is. Next piece, please.
If I could just interject here.
Sure.
You know, I also am fluent in Spanish. I have a different accent than yours, but I have had very similar experiences where people see me and hear me speak Spanish completely correct and clearly and so forth, and seem unable to understand me. Somehow this look should not be producing Spanish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like the visual is contradicting the oral and they're confused. So yes, I am familiar with that experience.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one who's been through something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so another thing that I'd like to mention is that I really love a fiber that's called linen. I just I love to wear linen. I love to touch linen. I love the way that I love the fact that linen is a natural fiber. I love the way that linen wrinkles, and I love the history of linen too. You know, linen has been around for thousands and thousands. Yeah, and I really appreciate it. So I love linen, and here in this particular piece, you'll see that that white fabric in the middle there, and that happens to be a linen napkin. Now, you know, I would find these napkins in secondhand stores in the United States. And I would buy them and wash them and then use them until they got holey, until they got worn out, until they got threadbare. But then I was too in love with them to throw them away. So I had to preserve them somehow. So that's another aspect of my work.
The preservation, you mean, or the recycling of things.
Oh, or the conservation of those things, those little snippets, those little pieces of fabric that have some special meaning for me. You know, who knows how many times I enjoyed a delicious meal and used that napkin.
Right.
Yeah. Delightful, no? I love that. Next slide, please. Okay, now, this is a tiny little piece. And oh, by the way, for many years, my pieces were all untitled, or untitled number 1, untitled number 2. Or for example, here you'll see that this piece has a list. Now, I loved these lists because they were the lists that Senora Luz, the Senora who helps out in our home and prepares the meals, Senora Luz would give me this list, or would give me a list of things that she needed for me to buy at the supermarket, which I did, that was a job that I always enjoyed because I knew that if I bought what was on the list, I would eat delicious food for a week. So this is kind of in homage of Senora Luz and her list, and the memory that I have of receiving these lists, going to buy what was on the list, and then enjoying the delicious food that would be made afterwards. And you'll see that in this list, you'll see little tears. That would be when I would go to the supermarket without a pencil or a pen to be able to cross out what I already had. So I just put a little tear beside it.
I quite like this piece because I guess because of the relationship to food and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, the food's really important here in Mexico.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and especially here in Puebla. Okay, this is another one of my pieces, and you'll start to see you'll start to see a yarn that has become very important in my work. It's a yarn that in the upper part and the lower part of this piece is the yarn that's 100% wool that I buy in Tlaxcala, which is the neighboring state of Puebla. This yarn is produced especially for artisans that make traditional textiles. But of course, I buy the yarn and use it to make something not traditional at all. And here, you know, for years and years, I would say little scraps of paper, and this has a little piece of sandpaper there in the middle. I don't know, I quite like the texture of the, excuse me, of sandpaper. And then I also really love the way that when you use sandpaper on something, there's almost as if the object that's being sanded draws something on the sandpaper. In this particular case, you don't really see anything that's been drawn by the object that was sanded with this. But in many cases that you will see things like that. Next slide, please. For example, you'll see here in the middle that piece of sandpaper has been drawn on by the piece that it was sanded with. Yeah. Next slide, please.
What is the sort of round
object there in the middle? That's a ceramic. That's a ceramic piece that somebody probably gave me, and I kept it. It was a little piece that, if I remember correctly, that the ceramic artist would put into the kiln to test, to see how the clay would fire.
Right.
Okay. I love this piece. Even if I say so myself, I love this piece. This is a very, well, not a very large piece, but it's about 1 meter by 1 meter, this piece. So it's one of probably the first piece that I did that's on you know, of that scale. This piece belongs to a collector here in Puebla, and every time that I visit her home, I always love seeing it. You know, my work is something that is maybe for some people a bit difficult to understand, but I love what I make. I love what I produce, and I find it absolutely beautiful. But for me, it's the essence of beauty. I'm so happy. I feel so privileged to be able to say that. Yeah. I just feel delighted to be able to say that. Yeah.
What are the materials that you have in this piece?
Excuse me?
What are the materials that you use
okay.
in this piece?
Okay. In the ground, you'll see a white kind of rectangular piece of fabric that's in the very ground of this piece, on the very behind everything else. That actually was a T-shirt that I couldn't say goodbye to, so I decided to make it into to include it in a piece of my work. The other piece of fabric there to the left is another one of my linen napkins that I adored, and you'll see what looks like a big white envelope there in the top. That was an invitation to a wedding, if I remember correctly. And then I've used lots of that yarn that I buy in Tlaxcala that's used by the artisans to make traditional textiles there as well. And then I had some pieces of kind of cardboard around here, and I just grabbed them and started sewing them. That's another thing you'll see in my work, that a lot of times I sew paper. I had the opportunity to take a bookmaking class when I lived in Mexico City, which was incredible. You know, books are sewn, or some books are sewn, are sewn together. And I love the idea of paper being sewn, of sewing paper. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. You know, there's nothing quite like enjoying a book that is sewn together as opposed to a book that's glued together.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Definitely.
It feels different. It moves differently. Another large piece here. You'll see here that I'm starting to use photos of my own body in this piece. I wasn't so, I'm not so interested in producing or making photos that are that are of an incredible photographic quality. I am much more interested in the composition, the composition, the colors, light, shadow. In this particular case, these were just printed digital photos that were printed in tonos in gray tones, and then mounted like this. And this kind of cross that you see here is something that I have also unknowingly included in other pieces. Now that I'm seeing this, I've just been working on a collection of collages of this type, and several of those there are crosses like this, kind of fabric crosses. Next piece, please. Oh, by the way, this is quite a large piece. That piece was is probably a meter by a meter as well.
Okay.
Okay. So here, you know, I said that I love taking photos, and I especially enjoy taking photos of especially Roman sculptures. And anytime we go to a museum where they have a collection of Roman sculptures, then I spend about all my time there taking photos, laying down on the floor almost, if the guards will let me, to get the right angle. And so you'll see several photos now of things like that. Next slide, please. I love these things. I love these statues, these sculptures, and I love the fact that they're in, you know, oftentimes they are stone of a neutral color. I find these pieces, I find them to be sensual. I find that they invite me to, they invite me into a world of fantasy where you know, Roman mythology is interesting, and yeah, lots of magic goes on there. So that's another one of the reasons that I love these types of sculptures, and I also think that they are aesthetically very beautiful. Next slide, please.
Do you choose these, or do you like these also because they have representations of fabric in stone?
You know what? I never thought about that. I never thought about that. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Although I do recognize that to, you know, this particular piece here, which has that drape, can you imagine carving that? You know, I can't even fathom that. I can't fathom that. Yeah.
And the previous one also was drapery.
Yeah, exactly. You're right about that. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't thought about that.
Of course, now we have two that don't have.
Right, exactly, exactly. This is another one of my photos, and I think I took this at the Met in New York. This was, for me, another thing about photos, taking photos, is that I love the el reto, the challenge, of finding the exact composition that for me is pleasing, that is pleasing to my eye. So I probably spent 10 or 15 minutes, looking through the lens of the camera trying to find the perfect position for this. Next slide. And so that was the photo you just saw, and then here you'll see how I've turned this into kind of a mixed media piece. The photo is printed there, and then you'll also see that I take photos of natural things, like this particular part. Lower part of this piece is a photo of rocks with lichen and moss that I took, I think, in some place in upstate New York. Mayopac, I think, is the name of the place. And yeah, I tend to do that. And there's also something magical for me about forest or woods. Woods would be the right word for me, because there were woods behind our house when I was growing up, and I always thought, I wonder what else lives out there. Are there fairies out there? Are there dwarfs? No, excuse me, elves. Oh. Are there, what other kind of creatures live out there? And I would always try and find four-leaf clovers.
Yes.
I'd just like to mention, you'll see in the upper part of this piece, you'll see an element there that it's kind of a rectangle that looks like it almost has a tail. Now this is where we start to see elements that have been crocheted, that I have crocheted using that wonderful yarn from Tlaxcala, and then I wash it in hot water with soap and it becomes felt. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but you wash a sweater that's made out of wool, you wash it in hot water and then you put it in the dryer, and then when it comes out, it's about 4 times the size that it used to be. Right. Well, but what's happened is that sweater, which was a knit fabric before, has now become felt. And felt is a fabric that will not stretch. It loses its stretch. And so that's what happens with these pieces. They become felt, and then they're no longer, you can't stretch them anymore. They become compact, and they become a bit fuzzy. And then you'll see other little pieces of textiles there that I can remember. The textile that's on the right was a piece of curtain. That gold-colored ribbon that's down toward the bottom there is something that I bought at a tianguis, or a tianguis here in Puebla. A tianguis would be kind of a street market.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, next slide. This is a little close-up there of that gold ribbon with a tassel on it. Yeah. Okay, here's another mixed media collection with a little bit of upholstery fabric that was used to cover something in our home, and you'll see that there's some kind of praying hands that were from a photo that I took of a religious themed painting, probably at the National Museum of Art in Mexico City. And the sculpture there, I can't remember where she's from. But anyway, you know, you'll start to see more color included in these pieces. And I think I'm becoming, this is a whole process of, I'm becoming more at ease here in Mexico. And I also am starting to regress to that point in my childhood when I was thinking about magical things. Fantastic beasts, fantastic beings. Next slide, please. Oaxaca, incredible city here in Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, has incredible museums. In the Museum of Contemporary Art there's a back patio that has beautiful ficus trees. And these are the trunks of those trees. And they've been put into a composition, made into a collage there, mixed media piece. Next slide, please. Where the trunks of these trees goes into the ground in Mexico, there are beautiful, in Oaxaca, there are the earth, the dirt, the soil has different colors. You'll see here the soil is red, which means that it has lots of iron in it. You can also find soil there or earth that has a green tone. Sometimes it'll be kind of a bluish tone. But there was something, I love the way that these look almost like feet that are planted firmly on the earth. Next slide, please. Here, more trunks from Oaxaca with a sculpture. That's not a Roman sculpture, although I think the theme is Leda and the swan. I think that's Leda y el cisne.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. But you'll see that I'm continuing to sew things. The sewing of the paper continues to be present, and little textile pieces as well. Next slide, please. So then digital printing appeared in different places here in Puebla. So I would take little close-ups of this is a close-up of moss that's growing on cement during the rainy season. And then to the left, you'll see a rust spot on the cement as well. Now, you know, I look at these, I would look at them and I think, wow, how beautiful, you know, how incredible that these things are here. They looked almost like worlds in and unto themselves. Magical worlds for me. Next slide, please. Now, this is a piece that is completely made with textile elements. You'll see that element again. I call them scales that I crochet using the wool that I buy in Tlaxcala, which becomes which felts up beautifully. And so I don't know how this idea came to me, but I love calling them scales because scales are something that protect certain types of animals and amphibian. I'm sorry, I can't remember how to pronounce that word.
Amphibians, yes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you know, when I started producing these, I thought I would think to myself, is this art or what is this? You know, why am I doing this? Now, we have an assistant that works with us. Her name is Andrea. And Andrea said to me one day, not too long ago, she said, "Oh, well, your art's conceptual. You make conceptual art." And I thought, oh, wow, yeah, you're right. I do make conceptual art. And she said to me, you know, the most important thing in your work is the idea behind it. It's not so much your technique. You know, really, if you think about it, there are many, many people that could crochet some scales like this, that could, you know, make them, wash them so that they become felted. But then I don't know how many people it would have that would have the idea to mount those scales this way. Mm-hmm. This for me almost represents some type of armor, I think, or a helmet, or something like that. And these pieces are tactile as well. I love for people to touch them.
Oh, okay.
Next slide, please. This is another textile piece made out of the same type of yarn. This particular piece has not been converted into filter, but what I did, or felt, excuse me, not been converted into felt, but this was a piece that is sculptural. This is another thing that I love. I love being able to work with textiles that become three-dimensional. You know, textiles are always thought of as being just so, just kind of being flat. But you know, in the sculptures that we saw, when you asked me about the draping of the textiles become three-dimensional. Also, when you make clothing out of textiles, the textiles become three-dimensional as well. Because the clothing is made to cover a three-dimensional person, a person that's three-dimensional, a body that's three-dimensional. So more and more I have started to work with textiles, and I love when they become, when they become three-dimensional. Next slide, please. Now, another thing that I love to work with are textiles with light or illumination. I'm not really sure why, but I just, it's, for me, these pieces are very beautiful, and there's something very inviting in these pieces, in my opinion. I find them to almost invite you to come inside. Yeah, I love making these pieces. Next slide, please.
This reminds me a little bit of the ficus tree images.
Yeah, you're right.
Earlier.
You're right. Yeah.
And when I first saw the ficus tree images, they reminded me of human limbs. And then of course the feet and so forth. And then there was one that reminded me sort of like a snout of an animal. So kind of sort of a different kind of living thing. So it's sort of interesting, these patterns, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so with digitally printed textiles becoming available, I started to make these, I guess what I would call tapestries, using pieces of fabric that I had around, with printed textiles. The textiles that you see here that are printed are from photos that I had taken, and here again, I hardly ever buy textiles, especially to make something. I always use things that I have on hand. And this particular piece is probably 2 feet long, no, excuse me, 2 meters by 1 meter wide. And when I produce these pieces, I try and put folds or pleats in the fabric so that they become three-dimensional, I like to give them dimension, or for them to have 3 dimensions. Next slide, please. Now, Something that I started working on about 5 years ago was etching, producing etchings on fabric. Now, you know that I can't throw anything away. So you can imagine how unorganized I am. But having so much stuff saved. But anyway, so this was a shirt. These were the sleeves. These were the sleeves from a shirt that I loved, made out of linen, and I couldn't throw them away. So I had to find some way to use them, and so I put printed etchings on them, and then what's it called? Embroidered them. And these are images. The etchings are photos that I have taken of Roman sculptures as well. Yeah. You'll see more color in these pieces. In Bolivia, in El Lago Titicaca, these beautiful reeds grow. They're called totoras. And so this is an image of totoras printed on rice paper with the application of textile elements. These totoras are incredible, especially when there's a soft breeze. The way that they move, it's just incredible, just incredible. Next slide, please. Another etching. These are also totoras, an image of totoras. I love these kind of blurry photo etchings that you can't really, I don't know if you can really tell what that is. It becomes a texture, and then the embroidery becomes almost almost a drawing, drawn by pencil. Another thing about me as a visual artist is that I'm not, I don't especially like to, excuse me, I don't have the patience to paint like for example, Jose. Jose is a painter. Jose is my husband, by the way. Jose is a painter, and he can spend hours and hours and hours on a painting, something that I don't have the patience to do.
Right.
Next slide. Monoprint. Or excuse me. Yeah, I think it's a monoprint is what they're called in Spanish.
What is the
monotype? I guess is sorry, I can't remember what they're called in English. Monotype or monoprint, I think they are in English. And this particular piece is it's the representation of one of my cocoons. We'll see some of my cocoons a bit further on. Next slide. Okay, now here you'll see these cocoons that I make, which are made out of the yarn from Tlaxcala. I crochet them, and you can see that they are three-dimensional, and they include this element of light. These pieces for me, they invite me to enter, to feel protected, to feel taken care of, a place where I can recuperate, where I can rest, where I can dream. Yeah, this was an installation mounted in a project here that's called the Design House. It's a project that's done each year to showcase interior designers here in Puebla City, in the city of Puebla. Next slide, please.
What is the light source? What do you use for the light?
A LED bulb.
Oh, okay.
But I always look for warm. Is that how you say it in English? Warm
Yeah.
light as opposed to blue light bulbs. Yeah. Okay, so that's me with more of my cocoons, with that wonderful molcajete on the floor there, which would have been used to make salsa many years ago.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Is that made out of volcanic rock then?
yeah, they usually are. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah. Okay, next slide. One of my favorite things to do here in Puebla is to visit the Paso de Cortez. I don't know if you had the opportunity to go there when you were in Puebla, but Paso de Cortez is right between the Popocatépetl and the Iztaccíhuatl. It's the point right.
No, I didn't. We didn't get a chance to go there. No.
That's an incredible adventure. And so I love going there. It's actually a national park. I love going there. There's something magical about going there. And so of course, you know, I dream about little magical things that live in the woods around there, or that those are not just woods. That's a big forest. And so these are my mushrooms that you see when you go up to Paso de Cortez, which are also made out of the wool, the famous wool that I always use, and then they're mounted over a recycled copper tubing base, and they also have an installation of LED lighting. Next slide. Another one of my magical mushrooms. Magical. Next slide. Now, I also do work sometimes in ceramics. This is a piece that's probably quite a big piece. It's probably, let's see, it's 60 by 60 by, probably a meter tall. And you know, if you look at this piece, it looks almost like a cocoon of some sort as well, or a nest of some sort. And this particular piece also has installation. It has a lighting installation, and when the light is turned on, there are some perforations there in the piece that the light shines through, and then of course it shines out through the top. And behind that piece, you'll actually see a mural that I did. You know, I told you that I'd never done a mural. This is actually one of the murals that I've done. The elements that you see in the mural are based on my cocoons, my fabric cocoons, my crocheted cocoons. And this particular piece has some of the cocoons are painted by hand, and then some are screen printed as well. Next slide. Okay, this is the cape. The cape that Juno used when she went to visit her comadre, Iztaccíhuatl. That's the name of this piece. Did you get that? The cape that Juno's cape that she used when she went to visit her comadre, Iztaccíhuatl. So this is what happened in my mind. Juno, the Roman goddess, comes to Mexico. She goes to visit her comadre, her best friend, girlfriend, and so this is a cape that she wore. Again, my textile pieces, you know, the little textile modules, scales, just, you know, mounted there, and it's a hanging piece, and it also has depth because of the number of scales that are hung there. Next piece. The piece before and this piece are quite large. They're probably about 2 meters long, or 2.5 meters long by about 1 meter and 3/4 wide. This is the El Puerto a Olimpia, the puerta, the door to Olympus. These are this particular piece is mounted on antique wood pieces that have come from other lots of different constructions. This is a collaboration that I did with a friend of mine who works in with those types of things. And so he did the base, and then I mounted the textile piece on the base that he had made. This particular piece is very, very heavy because I think all the wood is tropical wood. So, you know, those are very, very heavy. Next piece, please. Now, something that I've been doing for just over the last couple of years, I love there's a wonderful, I think one of the best archaeological museums in the world in Naples, and in Naples, in Italy, and I love that museum. And so, of course, you know, in Naples, it has an incredible collection of Roman sculptures, and so I just kind of go crazy when I go there. So anyway, this is one of the photos that I took there. This, I think, was this particular woman that's represented here is not a goddess. She is somebody's mother or somebody's wife, one of the Caesar's wives or mothers. And then behind her, I always intervene in these photos digitally, and you'll see one of my cocoons hanging behind her to give her solace. And I love the way that the wall's peeling, the paint is on the walls. Yeah. Next slide. This is Aphrodite as well, being protected by a cocoon. Next slide. So these are, this is another collection of scales crocheted in the wool that I love to use, but here you'll see the color pink. Now, this color is, this particular wool was dyed with cochineal, you know, which is a natural dye indigenous to Mexico, especially Oaxaca. Yeah, these pieces are beautiful for me.
It grows on cactus, right? The cochineal.
Right. Yeah. It's actually a little insect. It's a scale insect that grows on the nopal cactus, and it's actually a parasite. Yeah. Yeah. Next slide. Okay. This is one of the last pieces that or one of the most recent pieces that I've made, and this piece is called Hanging Whispers That Tickle. So if you remember some of the first work that you saw of mine was all white and neutral colors, and now look at this piece here, and look how the idea is that you walk underneath the upper part where the hanging these little tails come down. You can walk under there, and when you walk by, they kind of tickle you. They kind of tickle your head, and you'll see in the background a piece there, or part of this piece. It looks almost like as if it were an animal skin. That's made from sweaters that belonged to my sister that she no longer used, and so I converted them into felt, and then put them back together in what you're seeing here. And so my use of these much loved textiles continues. And you know what, my sister lives in France, so it was quite it was a chore for her to bring them. First of all, she brought them to North Carolina, and then I had to bring them to Mexico. So for them to finally arrive here, they went on a long trip, those sweaters did.
Yeah, that's quite a trek.
Yeah. So I think that finishes my presentation.
So how do you feel your art responds to the current pandemic crisis and stay-at-home orders and shutdowns and fear and all of the sort of things that are impacting how people react?
Okay, You know, one of the main themes of my proposal, my proposal is that I like to create pieces that offer comfort, that are visually inviting, that invite you to be touched, to be caressed, to be comforted. And I perceive that for many people, this moment that we're living through right now is a moment when people need to be comforted, when people need to feel solace, when people need to feel something soft, and they need to feel like they can go to a place where they can be protected and relax. That's basically how I would feel about, or how I would talk about my work in the context of what we're living through or going through at the moment. You know, my work, the work that I produce, is actually a result of everything that I've lived. And sometimes I you know, when we talked about doing this, it made me think a lot about, well, what does my work have to do with what we're living through? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I personally, because of my, you know, the choices that I've made in my life, you know, coming to live here in Mexico. When I arrived here, I spoke no Spanish at all. And so in a way, I was quarantined then. So these, you know, emotions maybe that I'm feeling now are not so new to me. They're things that I've felt before. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's gone through things like that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you learned crocheting from your grandmother and sewing from your mother, and those are activities generally associated with female work.
Yeah.
And I wonder how gender, or how you explore or relate to gender and the genderedness of that work through your art.
Okay. I don't really think about it in those terms. I do realize that sewing is something that, well, you know what, in the United States, for example, sewing is something that has mainly been done by women. In Mexico, it's a bit different. And as far as crocheting is concerned, that is something that's been done a lot by women. Although, you know what, I do remember in the 70s when I was growing up, I heard that there was a professional football player named Rosie Greer, and he took up knitting as a way to help him relax. And I remember thinking to myself when I heard that, I thought, wow, you know, all right, Rosie Greer, go for it, you know, cool. But, you know, when I crochet, it actually becomes a way of, it's almost as if it becomes a meditation for me, a form of meditation. You know, it's an action that you repeat. You just repeat over and over again. And you know, in answer to that question or that comment, I'll make another comment. I can remember one of my first exhibitions. I had some, you know, these little collages that were these little mixed media pieces that were all sewn together. And so I remember one of the people that was there in the opening came up to me and said, did you make these pieces? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said to me, oh, I thought they had been made by a little older woman. And I love that. I love that. Being able to do things that are unexpected can sometimes be very free. Yeah, can give you lots of liberty to do things. So I feel freed in that aspect.
Well, Robert, thank you for sharing us a tour of your art and how you feel it connects to the current situation that we're living through. I think many people have commented about how during the lockdowns, people have turned to art in many forms as a source of solace or inspiration or comfort. So, and this is just one more example of that. So thank you for sharing.
Well, no, thank you for inviting me to be here.